I salute you. I am your friend, and my love for you goes deep. There is nothing I can give you which you have not, but there is much, very much, that while I cannot give it, you can take. No heaven can come to us unless our hearts find rest in it today. Take heaven. No peace lies in the future which is not hidden in this little present instant. Take peace. The gloom of the world is but a shadow. Behind it, yet within our reach, is joy. There is radiance and glory in darkness, could we but see. And to see, we have only to look. I beseech you to look. Life is so generous a giver, but we, judging its gifts by their covering, cast them away as ugly, or heavy, or hard. Remove the covering, and you will find beneath it a living splendor, woven of love by wisdom with power. Welcome it, grasp it, and you touch the angel's hand that brings it to you. Everything we call a trial, a sorrow, or a duty, believe me, that angel's hand is there. The gift is there, and the wonder of an overshadowing presence. Your joys, too, be not content with them as joys. They, too, conceal diviner gifts. Life is so full of meaning and purpose, so full of beauty beneath its covering, that you will find earth but cloaks your heaven. Courage, then, to claim it. That is all. But courage you have, and the knowledge that we are pilgrims together, wending through unknown country, home.
We, unaccustomed to courage, exiles from delight, live coiled in shells of loneliness until love leaves its high holy temple and comes into our sight to liberate us into life. Love arrives, and in its train come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet if we are bold, love strikes away the chains of fear from our souls. We are weaned from our timidity in the flush of love's light. We dare be brave. And suddenly we see that love costs all we are and will ever be. Yet it is only love which sets us free.
A man wants a woman to stay as she was when he married the girl of his dreams. No aging or growing or changing at all with diet pills, facelifts, and creams. Conversely, a woman has other ideas for the man she has chosen to wed. She'll try to reform him, conform him, inform him. Voila, the relationship's dead. Oh, if I'd only listened to my mother, Mary Bunker, and the wise words of the poems she wrote many years ago, this might have been a very different sermon. Words I do listen to every week are those of our UU Meeting House affirmation. Love is the spirit of this meeting house. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. The sermon this morning is about one part of my particular spiritual journey, to seek the truth in love. The part of my journey that involves relationship, and more specifically, my relationship with my husband, Mason. To love another person is to see the face of God, said the French poet Victor Hugo. But for me, truly loving another person has been easier said than done. If you think you're enlightened, try spending a week with your family, the American spiritual teacher Ram Dass is reported to have said. Relationships have the uncanny ability to remind us of all the places where we remain wounded, where we are often not living in love, where we are not truly, unconditionally loving another person. And the closer the relationship, the more vividly all the ways we fall short may be revealed. But while often painful, those experiences of revelation have ultimately been a blessing for me, as they have pointed the way to where healing is needed, and to the possibility of a deepening of my ability to love another, to see the face of God. For it has been only a lifetime of conditioning, born of the pain of old relationships and the world, that has created the veil which has blinded me to the truth of love. While I have chosen to highlight today some of the lessons I've been gifted with from my over 50-year relationship with Mason, I hope that what I share this morning will translate to any relationship you may have with a partner, a parent, a child, a sibling, a coworker, a friend, or other. Believe it or not, I have actually found that this relationship-focused spiritual practice has helped me with my relationship with Donald Trump. Relationship therapists Linda and Charlie Bloom, married to each other for almost 50 years, say, practicing loving one person deeply over time opens up and strengthens our capacity to love bigger. When we deeply connect with each other, we lose our sense of being a separate individual self and merge into our expansive identity that is all-inclusive. In this experience, there is a disengagement from our ordinary-based identity. Loving one person becomes the doorway into all. They go on to say, it is the joy of using our relationship as our spiritual practice that can transport us into the sublime. But it is the breakdowns of relationships that can also propel us to a divine energy source. In fact, it is those places where our edges rub most abrasively against each other that can provide the greatest amount of growth. It is the fighting, betrayals, broken promises, communication breakdowns, blaming, rejections, silences, misunderstandings, distance between us that can cause such horrible pain and suffering that we are motivated to do some major work. A very long time ago, it became clear that I had some major work to do if I wanted to learn what it meant to really love unconditionally, to love free of the conditioning that life had offered me, the conditioning that caused me to respond in less than loving ways. I got involved in reevaluation counseling, an international peer counseling process to help heal old wounds. I became a counseling psychologist with a practice focusing on couples, and I attended spiritual retreats with a number of different teachers. I was highly motivated by my own pain and suffering and my desire to learn how to unconditionally love Mason, my life partner, the father of our son. This man, whom I had vowed to love, honor, and cherish, became my Buddha, my spiritual teacher, ironically, primarily in all the ways he re-stimulated my most unloving behavior. In the reading this morning, Maya Angelou beautifully said, Love arrives, and in its train come ecstasies, old memories of pleasure, ancient histories of pain. Yet it is only love that sets us free. And in the prayer by Fra Giovanni, he says, life is so generous a giver, but we, judging its gifts by their covering, cast them away as ugly, heavy, or hard. Remove the covering, and you will find beneath it a living splendor, woven of love by wisdom, with power. Welcome it, grasp it, and you touch the angel's hand that brings it to you. Much of what I will be sharing with you this morning arose out of ancient histories of pain, and at the time often looked ugly, heavy, or hard. In fact, so much so that Mason and I separated for 2 years at about the halfway point in our relationship, over 25 years ago. However, in retrospect and with hindsight, I now can see that even then, the angel's hand was always there. One of my greatest guides on this journey has been Byron Katie, an American spiritual teacher. And in her book, Loving What Is, she offers a variety of suggestions to help peel away all that can mask our love. 1. Whose business are you in? 2. No one can hurt me. That's my job. And 3. I need to be right. Is that true? These 3 suggestions definitely were relevant to much of what went wrong in my marriage years ago when Mason and I got separated. To be honest, I thought the apparent failure of our marriage was mostly his fault. After all, I was a relationship therapist and had done much more inner healing work than he had. But fortunately, after a while, during the 2 years that we were apart, I began to see all the ways that I had contributed to our problems. That awareness gave me the confidence to see things in myself that I might be able to change. So back to Byron Katie. 1. Whose business are you in? Back then, I was clearly focused to a great extent on what Mason was doing wrong. And all the effort that I was putting into running his life was leaving much less time and energy for me to run my own. I am appalled and humbled by all the time I spent thinking about and telling Mason about what he should and shouldn't be doing. I am embarrassed to recall that I even thought he should be more like me. How disrespectful, how undermining, how unloving, how unsuccessful, and how very boring that would have been to have had 2 of us. And while I like to think that I've made much progress in this area, I confess that it remains an ongoing learning process to truly live with the awareness that the only person I can really change is myself. With unsolicited advice, I was implying that Mason was incapable of figuring out his life without me figuring it out for him. 2, no one can hurt me. That's my job. I love this quote because it keeps me from giving my power away to any external situation or person and blaming it or the person for my unhappiness. But back then, I'd often blamed Mason for my unhappiness. It didn't occur to me that I might be unhappy because of how I was interpreting Mason's behavior rather than because of the behavior itself. It didn't occur to me that my own thoughts might be the problem. I remember a good example of this from very early on in our relationship. I was crying over an upset which I've long forgotten. and Mason was doing nothing to comfort me. Not only was he not doing anything, but I could see through my tears that he was disappearing, totally tuning out. My thoughts went along the line of, how could he disappear when I am so miserable? Obviously, he doesn't really care about me. How could I have married someone so unkind? My pain intensified, and my tears turned to sobs. What I didn't know at the time was that when Mason was a small child, his mother would often retreat to her room in tears. He would get really scared, would think he should be able to fix things, and as a way to protect himself from her pain and his as well, he learned to shut down and tune out. He didn't know what to do. My interpretation of Mason's behavior as a sign that he didn't care had created much of my own suffering. With compassion, over time, I grew to understand the childhood pain my tears brought up for him. And with compassion, Mason got way better at being there for a tearful me. It's important to mention here that compassion never meant staying in the relationship if I perceived it to be irreparably damaged. But questioning my thoughts, replacing negative judgmental thoughts with more positive, compassionate ones, both towards myself and towards Mason, always allowed me to be able to think more clearly and creatively, to know better how to understand what was going on for Mason and how to take the best possible care of myself. 3, I need to be right. Is that true? This insidious need to be right has derailed many a personal relationship, and on the world stage is seriously challenging the possibility of thoughtful and respectful communication between political factions everywhere. Old arguments about who was right often led to a lack of appreciation for what I might have learned from Mason's different perspective. The need to be right fostered a win-lose situation rather than one of respect for differing opinions and the possibility of collaboration. The relationship took a back seat to our own personal agendas. How liberating it's been to be more comfortable with how often I am wrong. The times when there is no right or wrong, and the times when being right or wrong doesn't really matter. Another of Byron Katie's quotes that's helped me so much in my relationship with Mason and in life in general: everything happens for me, not to me. This echoes the words of Fra Giovanni from this morning's prayer when he says, everything we call a trial, a sorrow, or a duty, believe me, the angel's hand is there. This perspective always reminds me that I can replace any feelings I might have of being a victim of my life circumstances with feelings of gratitude for the gift of the circumstances, even if it may take me a while to discover what that gift might be. This is an ongoing mantra that I get to practice regularly, and when I can remember it, all relationship and life challenges become opportunities. Over the past 50 years, Mason and I have triggered and brought to the surface most of the old unhealed wounds that each of us received growing up. Often, that has been quite painful. Sometimes we've been triggered at the same time, a definite challenge. But I do believe that when old, painful feelings remain buried, they tie down our full creative, emotional, and spiritual potential, and definitely diminish our ability to love unconditionally. So I have tried to remember that this re-stimulation, this triggering, this bringing to the surface of my sometimes ancient wounds has all been a golden gift. What a miracle it seems that life brought Mason and me together when I was only 17. So back to a couple of the other big barriers on my journey to unconditional love and humility: judgment and control. Judgment. About 10 years ago, Mason and I thought we were doing pretty well in our marriage, but decided to go for a tune-up with a coach from the Hoffman Quadrinity process, a powerful life-healing tool. We were asked to arrive for the weekend with a list of 10 things we'd like to change in our partner. At first, we both thought this was going to be really challenging. We couldn't possibly come up with 10 things. We were definitely a little smug in thinking that we had gone way beyond being so judgmental of each other. Well, no worries. We got into it, and we both came up with pretty extensive lists. Despite all the relationship work we had done at this point, we were completely unprepared for what came next. We were told to turn our lists around and consider how each judgment was actually about us. Our lists were no longer about what was wrong with our partner. They were about what we had difficulty with in ourselves. Yikes. Humbled. How easily we each had projected our own weaknesses onto the other. And then there's control, similar to the need to be right. I loved that everyone used to call Mason Mr. Fix-It. He had to be in control. One day, long after we'd gotten back together, we were talking to our wise son, Cameron, about some of what we had learned about our relationship challenges over time. And I mentioned how much Mason had grown in his old need to be in control. Our son, the only first-hand, up-close and personal, long-time, definitely most objective observer of our relationship, said, in a loving way, "But Mom, you were way more controlling than Dad." Dang, humbled again. Not only was my need for control, my will, in opposition to Mason's, but it was in opposition to the unpredictability and the uncontrollability of all of life. I wasn't loving what was. I was wanting things my way. This true confessions of some of the many hurdles I've encountered in a long-term relationship is really meant to be a celebration of the many ways a relationship has offered me the possibility of progress toward glimpses of unconditional love and the divine, despite all the conditioning I unwittingly received. I've had to remind myself along the way that blaming myself or others is never helpful. None of us chose what we got, nor did those who came before us. But we each have the ability to interrupt the conditioning that has been handed down through the generations. Each time I become more conscious of a way that my conditioning is hindering my ability to unconditionally love another person, to find the truth in love, I am being given an opportunity to move forward in a return to love. If I am not blaming others, myself, or life circumstances, I am empowered to begin healing in whatever way I choose. And any healing in love for one can lead to love for all. As I quoted from the relationship therapist, the Blooms, earlier, practicing loving one person deeply over time opens up and strengthens our capacity to love bigger. When we deeply connect with each other, we lose our sense of being a separate, individual self and merge into our expansive identity that is all-inclusive. In this experience, there is a disengagement from our ordinary-based identity. Loving one person becomes the doorway into all. At the same time, it's also been important for me to remember the words of another American spiritual teacher, Adyashanti, when he says, to be loving isn't to be perfect. It's to be connected and warm with both ourselves and others. It's to be residing in the humble heart. Over the door of this meeting house, we have a banner that says, standing on the side of love. Theoretically, I'm all in. But experientially, it has been and continues to be an ongoing journey full of stumbles and missteps, but a beautiful journey, as Victor Hugo said, to see the face of God. May it be so, and blessed be.